Welcome to Bedcrime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. If you like all things true crime, if you like it delivered in a peaceful, tranquil manner, if you like it clear and concise without drama, then I highly recommend you subscribe. And if you like what you hear, please smash the like button. It's a free way you can help. And now, without further ado, let's dig in. Hi friends, sorry I didn't have a chance to meet with you yesterday. I was at the Mayo Clinic all day with my dad, and he got a lot of tests done. He may be having a procedure soon to try to do something to help a very leaky valve in his heart. He also has MDS, which is a problem with his red blood cells, which affects his hemoglobin. So he's battling multiple serious health issues. But I'm telling you, my dad has the will of a lion. He loves life and he keeps wanting to fight, so I'm trying to fight with him. Now I'm still working on part 2 of my Karen Reed video series, and I'm also trying to do something with the Madeline Soto case, but I still wanted to touch on Sebastian Rogers a tad, so here we go. CrimeCon took place last weekend in Nashville, Tennessee. I watched from afar and I vowed that next year I will be there. It's a promise I'm making to myself, and I'm gonna do it. Well, Dolly of Dolly Vision was lucky enough, and he was there, and he had a chance to meet Nancy Grace. Per Dolly, when he asked her about Chris Proudfoot and what she allegedly thought of him, I'm saying allegedly because this is secondhand from Dolly. I trust him, but you know what I mean. Per Dolly, Nancy Grace declared, quote, "He's a liar." Nancy offered a polygraph to Chris, you may recall that, and he said he'd be there, name the place, name the date, and then he failed to follow through. If he was unsure about taking Nancy's polygraph, he could have said instead, "Let me check with the TBI and I'll get back to you." But instead, Chris overpromised and underdelivered. Thus, Nancy Grace has allegedly declared him a liar. Chris only had one chance to make a first impression with the legendary Nancy Grace, and he blew it. Quelle surprise, as they say in French. No, it's not really a great surprise. I then finally watched criminal profiler Pat Brown's video about the Proudfoots, and she pointed out that in their 3-hour interview with Smiley's Story World, instead of focusing on telling the viewers about Sebastian, the Proudfoots instead dedicated the 3-hour interview on a rather small channel to doing what Brown described as damage control. Chris and Katie talked about themselves, and while Katie seemed sad at times and teary, Chris appeared to be enjoying himself. Brown said, "Something I've been saying as well, and that is that Chris Proudfoot shows no emotional attachment to Sebastian. He doesn't seem to care one iota that this kid has been gone for more than 100 days now." Brown also pointed out that for a stepfather, Chris spent very little time with Sebastian. He described spending nearly all of February away from home in Hendersonville. He said he was working 3 hours away at the St. Jude's Hospital. He was working there as a crane operator. At most, it sounds like Chris spent maybe 2 weekends a month at home. And if those were the weekends that Sebastian was with his biological father, Seth Rogers, then Chris Proudfoot pretty much avoided Sebastian altogether. So although Chris wants us to believe that he was a very loving stepfather and that he spent time with Sebastian, and that he enjoyed Sebastian's little quirks and sense of humor, it doesn't sound like he was spending a lot of time with him, at least not in the month of February. Pat Brown also questioned what type of marriage relationship Chris and Katie Proudfoot have when he's gone so much of the time. Brown also asked if Chris was so devoted to Katie and Sebastian, why couldn't he find crane work closer to home? There have to be jobs like that near Hendersonville, or at least not as far away as Nashville. So it almost seems like Chris opted to work far from home. Brown said in actuality, it appears that he lives in an RV, either in Nashville or Mississippi or somewhere else other than Hendersonville. Hearing that Nancy Grace called out Chris as being a liar, and hearing Pat Brown point out how little time Chris was actually spending at home with Katie and with Sebastian, tells me, number one, you can't trust anything that comes out of Chris Proudfoot's mouth, and two, Chris likely did not want to be around Sebastian, like ever. And we've heard both Chris and Seth say that they were working together on getting Katie to agree to hand over full-time care of Sebastian to his bio dad, Seth Rogers. So it does seem like Chris had a mission to get Sebastian out of his life, out of his home, away from him as much as possible, maybe because of the custody issue with Nina Gomez, his fourth wife. He wanted to get more custody of his daughter, Faith. There are rumors floating around that Chris Proudfoot's mother, Kathy Bowersox, allegedly called Sebastian something of a predator. She allegedly used a different P word, but that's a rumor. I haven't seen that verified, so it's allegedly. Rumor has also been that Chris wanted to keep Sebastian out of his home because he didn't want Sebastian around Faith for fear that Sebastian might try something with Faith, although there's no evidence that Sebastian ever tried anything like that. We know for a fact Sebastian was essayed when he was 10. I also heard a story, I don't know if it's true, but it was alluded to that Sebastian may have been at school, perhaps in the boys' bathroom, and pulled out his pineapple to compare notes with the other boys. I don't know if that's true. It could be something that resulted from his own essay. It might have turned something on in his head, switched something on, sexualized him before his time. Both parents have said that although Sebastian was 15, his maturation level was more like that of a 10-year-old. And Katie and Chris Proudfoot have said that Sebastian could be socially awkward. They both said that he could invade personal space of other kids at school, which made the other kids uncomfortable, and Sebastian just did not understand that social cue. Perhaps that's why Kathy Bowersox maybe unfairly was judging Sebastian, allegedly. Now, there's also a photo of Katie floating around that shows a tattoo of Sebastian's name. Most people who get someone's name tattooed on their body really feel a strong love and connection to that person. We've also seen Katie cry real salty tears. We've heard her crying in other interviews when we couldn't see her face. She does seem to have an emotional attachment to Sebastian, at least at times. I'm not saying in all her interviews, but in some of them. Also, when she talks about Sebastian's autism, she uses specialized terms. When I hear her talking about it, I get the feeling she was very involved in his care. She was trying a lot to get him to reach his full potential. A mom who doesn't care isn't going to take the time to learn all these things, to make sure that her son is getting in all these classes, yada, yada, yada. But when we hear Chris talking about Sebastian, he seems more obsessed with finding ways to punish Sebastian than to help him overcome the emotions and the anxiety that may have been driving the incontinence issues that he allegedly was experiencing. Based on what Seth Rogers has said, and what neighbors have alleged, and what Chris's fourth wife, Nina Gomez, has alleged, and the knowledge that there are at least 2 Child Protective Services reports with Chris Proudfoot's name on them, I'm concluding that Chris Proudfoot is likely not a good man, not an honorable man who keeps his word, not a particularly good husband because he's on his 5th marriage to Katie Proudfoot, and he's really not that old. I don't see him as a gentle, nurturing man who should be around impressionable children and or vulnerable children. By the way, if we are to believe Katie Proudfoot's divorce papers, then Seth Rogers wasn't any of those things either, at least back when Katie filed for divorce. I get the feeling Seth has been trying to do better for Sebastian, but I'm wondering if the reason why Seth only has Sebastian 2 weekends a month, could it be down to what was in those divorce papers? I feel that Seth seems to have a deep emotional connection to his son. And I don't harp on Seth too much because he has an ironclad alibi from what I understand. He was captured at work on multiple cameras, so I don't believe he's involved in Sebastian's disappearance. Now, while Seth has that deep emotional connection, we know that Mr. Chris, which is what he forced Sebastian to call him, really was just a Mr. Chris, some disciplinarian guy married to his mother who barely spent time with him, but who caused him a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety whenever they crossed paths. I'm saying that based on what Seth Rogers has said, and that is that Sebastian felt that his home with his biological father was the only place where he felt safe. It sort of sounds like Katie was between two imperfect situations. A harsh husband who didn't care about her autistic special needs child, and an ex-husband who was a major work in progress with occasional angry outbursts. I say that because Seth has lashed out publicly at his former PI, Chloe, as well as at YouTuber Trevor Lee of TrevTime. To me, he should have spoken to these people in private and not with F-bombs on YouTube. A grown man with a child ideally would try to have greater emotional intelligence than that. But Seth's anger, I think, right now anyway, comes out of frustration over his missing son. Chris Proudfoot seems angry at his core. He also sounds like a bully when it comes to Sebastian and perhaps all little children, like someone who had all the power and chose to abuse it to the detriment of a young boy on the spectrum who also suffers from chromosomal deletion syndrome. Sebastian has a pocket of fluid on his skull that means he can't roughhouse to his heart's content. This is why Seth kept him out of football. Sebastian also has bone issues that prompted a physician to recommend that he wear a chest plate. He was likely going to be dealing with his chromosomal deletion syndrome for a lifetime. Who picks a child with these challenges to hit with a belt? A bully. A man who's been married 5 times. Those are all red flags, and it screams not an easy man to try and build intimacy with and a good life with. I started re-watching Nina Gomez when she appeared, and she spoke about her brief time being married to Chris Proudfoot, and a lot of what she was saying was about the way he punished her children and how he could be incredibly harsh even with her 3-year-old son by another man. And Chris was trying to say things like, he needs to grow up, he needs to be a man. And she was saying, well, he's only 3 years old. I mean, the doubters can say, well, they never proved who the neighbors were or that what they said was true. But you see, you have all these different people basically telling the same story about Chris Proudfoot. And that is that he's a harsh disciplinarian. He is not an easy man to get along with. He is brash. He has said that himself. We have Nancy Grace saying that he's a liar. I think that the writing is on the wall. We can see that if a crime did occur, who might have prompted that crime? Allegedly, this is me speculating, but there are red flags all over Hendersonville. Until the next time on Bed Crime Stories. Now smash that like button!
I can't find our son, and I jumped in my car and I drove around the neighborhood and I drove over by the school, and he's already at this point I was hysterical and I was crying and I was screaming, and he was three-wayed law enforcement and was telling them our son is missing and we don't know what's going on, and he was go back to the house, they're on their way. And I drove back to the house, and 20 days later we haven't found him.
God, yeah, I can't even imagine how stressful that is. And also, like when we were driving up here, like this neighborhood is so